You're welcome to the Gavel. I'm Linda Akibi. In about 2 weeks, the 9th Assembly will come to an end. The 10th Assembly is expected to come on board sometime in June after the president-elect takes his oath of office on May 29, 2023, and gives a proclamation for the inauguration of a 10th Assembly. A whole lot has happened in the last 4 years of a 9th Senate and House of Representatives. We've seen landmark legislations enacted, very pointed motions on a range of issues, as well as responses to national issues, namely COVID, and even the 2023 general elections. We've seen a parliament which some analysts say did not assert their independence from the executive and failed to do due diligence over borrowing request from the executive. For the next few episodes of The Gavel, before the inauguration of a 10th Assembly, we'll be speaking with a cross-section of Nigerians to evaluate the performance of a 9th Assembly along its critical roles of lawmaking, oversight and representation. In the 4 years of the lifespan of the 9th Assembly, federal lawmakers have walked these corridors, held sessions in their chambers and meeting rooms, enacting legislations, intervening in national issues, and providing representation to Nigerians. This will all come to an end in a few weeks as the curtain draws for the 9th Assembly and the 10th Assembly comes on board. But how will the 9th Assembly be remembered? The 9th Assembly was inaugurated on June 11, 2019, and Senator Ahmad Lawan was elected Senate President, while Senator Ovie Omagege Deputy Senate President.
That I will preserve, protect.
In the House of Representatives, Mr. Femi Gbajabiamila was elected Speaker and Mr. Idris Wase Deputy Speaker. Both houses got to work immediately and clearly spelled out an ambitious legislative agenda where they targeted several sectors for reform through legislative interventions. The 9th National Assembly set out to pass some legislations which previous assemblies failed to do, namely the Petroleum Industry Bill and the Deep Offshore and Inland Basin Production Sharing Contract Act.
The 9th Assembly has passed very impactful legislation in very critical sector of our economy. The Petroleum Industry Act, which has a checkered history for a decade and a half. We have been able to pass it. And of course, the Electoral Act 2022, the Company and Other Matter Act, Banks and Other Financial Institution Act, and of course, amendment to the NDIC Act. And profound is also certain constitutional amendment that has impacted on restructuring of our country. Like, for instance, taking the correctional services to be matter in the concurrent legislative list, and of course, generation and distribution and distribution of power even within national grid to be concurrent matter. So I would say that in terms of constitutional amendment, in terms of impactful legislation, we'll have been able to work. And of course, in terms of our oversight function, we have been able to take very important decisions, particularly during the COVID era, to assist in ensuring that we cushion the effect on Nigerians. And of course, the price of crude oil, when it plummeted, we're able to use our oversight function to reduce the cost of production per barrel. And of course, introduce transparency into the process of the fight against insurrection.
The 9th Assembly also returned Nigeria to a one-year budget cycle, gave the country a new electoral act, and amended the 1999 Constitution.
We've been able to leapfrog and do a lot of bills and motions way ahead of what we did in the 8th Assembly. The PIA, the Electoral Act, the offshore law as well, and we're able to do a lot of bills that aid devolution of powers. I'm happy to say that I got 3 bills assented to by Mr. President. I did the DRDB, Defense Research Development Bureau. I did the bill on the railway, removing it from the exclusive leave and placing it in the concurrent. I also did the bill on power as well. So very, very, very fruitful assembly. It's going to be very difficult to surpass the achievements we got in the 9th Assembly.
In the last over 3 years of the 9th National Assembly, there are certain highlights, positive highlights that you could credit with respect to base processing for the current assembly. It is this National Assembly that has been able to pass the petroleum industry bill into an act. It is this National Assembly that has been able to return the budget cycle to the January to December fiscal window. It is this National Assembly that has been able to extensively amend the Electoral Act, and gave lots of Nigerians and indeed, the international community hope that we're heading in the right direction as far as the conduct of elections and its outcomes are concerned.
But one tenacious perception which the 9th Assembly was unable to shake off was a view that they are rubber stamps to the executive.
Well, the issue of rubber stamp depends on what angle or what perspective one is looking at it. In terms of executive getting most of its approvals, or in terms of not over questioning maybe ideas or projects from the executive. I don't think that is the case, because there are little or no issues that comes to the House that are not debated and trashed to the best of the abilities of those present.
People believe that this assembly has not beaten the way it should. It has been backing. This paddy feeling between them and the executive, whereby certain functionaries of government. In fact, that is one of the things they have heard against the man who has been nominated by the party to be Senate President, Ababi. That at the time they invited him, he never came. At the time they invited officers who were serving under him, and he just thought that, what can they do? So there has been that particular idea that this particular 9th Assembly did not back as much as or bite as much as it has backed, if you permit that expression.
We cannot live without working harmoniously with one another. That is the beauty of separation of powers. So we do our laws, we need the executive to assent to it. At times the executive sends us executive bills, which we also consider and pass. So in America, the system also guides who emerges as the Speaker or the Senate President. The Vice President sits as the Deputy Senate President in America. So that is to show that there has to be, one way or the other, a meet together between both. In Nigeria, it is deemed to be rubber stamping. It's not. When you work harmoniously with the executive, it brings out fruitful endeavors. It's nothing negative at all.
The National Assembly, to put it summarily, has failed woefully with respect to oversight, of the executive arm of government. And I am talking specifically about this 9th National Assembly. It is not peculiar to it, but I think that this 9th National Assembly took it a notch or two, if not more, higher, with respect to a failed oversight, delivery of oversight function on the executive, and that's the reasons are obvious. This is the National Assembly that didn't make any pretense about being in bed with the executive. It didn't make any pretense about being the rubber stamp. Like I sometimes say, it didn't make any pretense about being an appendage, of the executive, of the presidency, to put it more directly.
In the 9th Assembly, the anointed candidate in quote emerged, and that brought about cordial relationship that also led to recording of a lot of, dividends of democracy, but at what expense? That relationship, I describe it as a marriage of unequal yoke, whereby the National Assembly was at the receiving end, the 9th Assembly at the receiving end.
Despite the numbers of legislations passed in the Senate and House of Representatives in the last 4 years, some keen observers of a National Assembly say they were unable to pass some other highly needed legislations.
We're talking about having a system, having a law, having regulations whereby when the government shut down the country, it was just by mere pronouncement. It was unlawful. There should have been a law and a regulation that shuts down the country. So you're shutting down the country based on regulation, this, of so and so law. You don't come as like a military dictator and say that the country is shut down and that's it. That's not how other countries we saw did it. And when, okay, we're providing so and so amount of money, who appropriated it? There was no National Assembly to do that. Even when there were palliative resources meant to make things easier for people, and those things did not reach the people, what did the National Assembly do about it?
The economy is not a state that we're all proud of. You know the state of public finance management. You know the state of health of our fiscal conditions. Even the petroleum sector, in spite of the enactment of the Petroleum Industry Act, there is still unresolved issue around even implementation of the act, and that's a key, function of oversight, of the National Assembly.
If you look at the request of the president for loan approvals, they didn't receive robust legislative debate and argument so that the country as a whole can understand the purpose of the loan, the need for the loan, the agreements around the loan, and the cost of fund attached to this loan. What we see is perceived public interest around the loan, that this loan is good. But the details of why it is good, the National Assembly, through a very robust legislative debate, will make it known to the people.
They also fault the National Assembly over what they described as poor responsiveness to some burning national issues.
For the army to have been deployed that day, there had to be an act of the National Assembly. There was no act of the National Assembly. The military were deployed outside their barracks and nobody held anybody accountable. Here we had a parliament that represented Nigerians who were in the eye of the storm there, and nobody said anything. Nobody looked into it. So right now you cannot...
No investigation?
No investigation, nothing. Because some people deny that there were live bullets shot or there were soldiers there or so on. What is the National Assembly say on that? Nothing.
As the 10th Assembly comes on board in June 2023, these analysts highlight the expectations of the incoming Assembly.
I'm looking forward to a 10th National Assembly that can actually back and bite. If something's going to... Don't just do it for the cameras. Let there be consequences for it so that other people can shape up so that we can start making some progress. Otherwise, it's how many years in civil rule, and we don't seem to be making much progress at all.
We would expect that there would be less... they would try not to be indolent. They would try not to be frivolous. They would try to focus on the key core issues that continue to bedevil the country. We expect that they would give, the required support and provide the requisite oversight over the next administration that will come on board from May 29. So we would expect to see an alignment, if not, some proactiveness from the legislature.
Every assembly should be a better version of what it inherited or what bettered it. The 10th Assembly ought to be better than the 9th Assembly. And that is why it is heartening that you see a lot of, governors who are part of the system. A lot of technocrats are coming. May we be able to make it in society, in different callings, in different lives, endeavors, and all of that.
In anticipation of a 10th National Assembly, Nigerians would want to see a crop of parliamentarians who would prioritize national interest and be more proficient in finding solutions to the challenging economic and security problems of the country. They would also want Parliament to properly scrutinize loan requests going forward to ensure that Nigeria is not plunged further into debt. The matters of revenue generation and fiscal discipline are also issues which analysts say the National Assembly must pay greater attention to, particularly through its oversight of government agencies. You're welcome back to the Gavel. Let's take a look at some major happenings in the National Assembly during the week.
President Muhammadu Buhari's tenure will elapse on May the 29th, but this has not stopped him from sending requests to the National Assembly to either approve borrowing or settle debt. Recently, President Buhari wrote to the Parliament requesting approval to borrow $800 million from the World Bank to provide palliatives to Nigerians as a means of cushioning the effects of the proposed removal of fuel subsidy. While the National Assembly is still processing this request, President Buhari has again written to the federal legislature to settle priority judgment debt incurred by federal ministries, departments and agencies through the issuance of promissory notes.
The judgment debts are to be settled through the issuance of promissory notes, which will then be redeemed over time through provisions in the budgets of the federal government of Nigeria. Thus, debt securities are being issued for the settlement of the judgment debts, and the approval of the National Assembly is required for this purpose.
The matter of the nation's ballooning debt profile is a source of worry to many Nigerians who are uneasy the country will be paying huge amounts from its dwindling resources to service the debt. According to the Debt Management Office, Nigeria's national debt would likely hit 77 trillion naira by May 2023, and financial experts say this is unsustainable at the current tax and revenue to GDP and debt service payment ratios. Whereas the Senate will be looking at how to respond to this latest request from the President, in the meantime, the upper chamber has passed through second reading a bill to amend the National Emergency Management Act to provide for the establishment of the NSAS Victims Compensation Fund.
The implementation of the recommendations of all the panels and committees regarding compensation has been very discouraging. The victims have been left to continually groan under the pain of injury inflicted by hoodlums during the NSAS protests. Distinguished colleagues, this amendment, therefore, is to make provision for the establishment of the NSAS Victims Compensation Fund for the compensation of verified victims of the 2020 NSAS protests.
The Senate accordingly forwarded the bill to its Committee on Special Duties for further legislative work. Ahead of the inauguration of the 10th Senate and House of Representatives in June 2023, the Parliamentary Advocacy Network Nigeria has called on lawmakers-elect to reject plans by the All Progressives Congress (APC) to select the presiding officers of the Assembly. Addressing journalists in Abuja on Thursday, the association warned against what it describes as the mistake of 2019, when the positions of the presiding officers of the 9th National Assembly were micro-zoned, noting that it will birth another assembly which will be unable to assert its independence.
Parliamentary Advocacy Network condemns the inherent loopholes in the zoning arrangements of presiding officers' positions in our National Assembly, allegedly done by the ruling APC and the President-elect, which have thrown the entire lawmakers-elect, their political parties, and the nation at large onto an unavoidable collision course. We therefore urge lawmakers-elect to take the destiny of the National Assembly as freely entrusted on them by Nigerians in their own hands.
In the House of Representatives, Honorable Unyimeidem has drawn the attention of the House to the dwindling electricity supply across the country.
Millions of electricity consumers in Nigerian homes and communities may be plunged into darkness in the coming weeks as the federal government, through the Transmission Company of Nigeria, TCN, and the market operator, EMO, have begun massive disconnection of data electricity distribution companies, DISCO, from the national grid.
Another lawmaker, Honorable Sada Soli, moved a motion on the need to absorb student returnees from Sudan into institutions across the country.
Cognizant of the fact for the federal government to consider the quota system imposed on certain courses such as law and medicine, to waive them for the students concerned in order to enable them continue with their programs pending the resolution of the Sudan crisis.
Both motions were adopted. However, the final motion of urgent public importance on Honorable Taiwo Oluga does not receive the acceptance of the Green Chamber.
The need to urge the government of the United Kingdom to desist from banning Nigerian student immigrants from migrating with their families.
The rejection of the motion comes amid concerns over the rising number of Nigerians leaving the country in search of better opportunities and living conditions. For a second time, the Attorney General of the Federation appeared before the House Ad Hoc Committee investigating the alleged missing $2.4 billion in revenue from 48 million barrels of crude oil in 2015. He maintained his earlier position that he is unaware of the missing funds and responded to the request of the committee for the statement of accounts of recoveries made since 2015.
Under my watch, the Office of the Attorney General has succeeded in recovering over $1 billion for the Nigerian state over time. So I have no problem with the committee, but I have problem with any insinuation suggesting wrongdoing against my person or against the person of the Attorney General or indeed the Federal Ministry of Justice as far as this issue is concerned. The Accountant General and Ministry of Finance are by tradition the custodian of the federal government accounts, and the Attorney General has no hand in it.
Both parties also disagreed on the interpretation of the single account of the Federation as stated in the Constitution.
Dedicated accounts were indeed open on the instruction of the President, which is contained in this bundle of documents, which is Table 2.
The Constitution here says, and it does not talk of disbursement, it says the Federation shall maintain a special account to be called the Federation account, into which shall be paid all revenues collected by the government of the Federation.
Are you, in essence, by this interpretation, insinuating that nobody can do whatever deduction is made by a hotel, for example, if you are talking of the transport, from the customer, it must go direct into the Federation account? You cannot interpret the law to create impossibility. But the essence is, if the money is lodged into the account of the transport, is it eventually, if it is meant for the Federation account, transmitted into the institution responsible for ensuring at the end of the day that it gets into the into the Federation account? And the answer is yes.
With just days to the end of his time in office and the life of the 9th Assembly, the Attorney General agreed to work with the committee to get to the root of the missing funds. Meanwhile, the Minister of Finance and the Central Bank Governor are yet to make an appearance before the committee. On Wednesday, May the 24th, the House of Representatives Ad Hoc Committee on Fuel Subsidy recommended a forensic audit of the NNPCL after it realized that the figures it presented did not align with those of other stakeholders in the petroleum industry. It goes further to propose a solution to ascertain the country's daily consumption of premium motor spirit.
When we asked the Accountant General to tell us the amount that the country pays for subsidy, the Accountant General could not give us an answer because he said he doesn't have any information. In fact, even the mother ministry, that is Ministry of Petroleum Resources, it has no information as regards to fuel supply in this country. It is the considered opinion of this committee that the Nigerian Midstream and Downstream Petroleum Authority must establish a criteria for all the retail outlets to give it feedback on a daily basis or on a weekly basis as regards to the actual amount it received and the actual amount it dispenses.
As the plenary wound down, the Speaker resumed his seat and asked that the order paper for Thursday be made light to allow members attend the official commissioning of the permanent site of the National Institute for Legislative and Democratic Studies. The Deputy Speaker countered the Speaker, and there was obvious tension between both men.
I want to make sure that we should do our functions. Those who have the interest to go to ministry, they have the right to go there. But our main primary function in this parliament is to make law, and our citizens should be more priority to us. Thank you for listening.
Okay. Perhaps, yes, you don't appreciate the importance of bills like some of us do. I didn't mention
things, Speaker, that I was part of those that wanted to put it was set up. So I have every information and idea and what it's.
It was set up, if I may. We're not adjourning the House to go to bills. What I said was, let's try and make it light and leave here by 2. If you want to resume at 10, we will do our work. But we will adjourn this House at 2 o'clock. I will witness bills because it is important to me.
Sir, the parliament is about us, not about I. Thank you very much.
Honorable Gbajabiamila openly stated his disappointment in the Deputy Speaker and insisted on a lighter order paper for Thursday's plenary.
This is the first time in history I've been in this House for many years. Perhaps even longer than anybody here. This is the first time in history that a deputy speaker will be challenging what the speaker has said. Let us rise so I don't understand what you mean by challenging that for a moment. There should not be a constitution.
The tension between both men may not be unconnected with the open endorsement of Honorable Tajuddin Abbas for Speaker of the 10th House of Representatives. Despite the declaration of Honorable Idris Wase for that position, it would now seem that a once envied working relationship between the Speaker and his deputy may come to a sad end as the 9th Assembly shuts down.
This is where we call it a day on this week's edition of A Gavel. If you have any views on any of the issues discussed, please email us on thegavel@channelstv.com. Thank you for staying with us and see you again next week.